Am I on? I am on. Last Sunday, as Dee mentioned, in my sermon, I described the process of engaging in a significant, for our purposes here, social justice issue, and how is the best, what are the best practices, what is the best way to actually engage in such an issue in an informed way, intentional way, and in a way that actually does more good than harm. The process that I described is called praxis, P-R-A-X-I-S, which has a long history in philosophy and religion. The first thing you do is, of course, step one is you identify there's a problem. And related to homelessness, houselessness in Duluth, the problem clearly is that we have really a growing population that is without a place to live, without appropriate protective housing. That number is increasing because of a number of factors, economic most especially. So you identify that there's a problem, and we who are compassionate people and are seeking to follow the way of Jesus want to find a way to relieve suffering, to alleviate the suffering of those who do not have protective housing. So you analyze the situation. Why is it this way? What has happened to make this happen? Why is it an increasing number of people? So you really do press on the why. Additionally, you employ all of the social sciences, all of the things that we now know, psychology and sociology and economic issues and so forth. You really analyze it using a number of different lenses. Then you come up with an idea to try to alleviate that suffering. Then you do it. Whatever that idea is, you employ it. And then you see its repercussions. Has it helped? Has it not helped? What are the missing pieces? Did we actually uncover something that we didn't realize back when we were doing our analysis? What is this new situation now that we have worked on because we employed this idea? And you analyze it again. And you discover, for example, we didn't pay attention to the tools of dealing with addiction and alcoholism. We should have, but we didn't. Now, I'm just using this as an example. Okay, let's look at that. What are those tools, and how might we employ them? You then analyze that situation again. You see that what we've uncovered and discovered is that a significant piece of the puzzle has to do with addiction and alcoholism, so let's employ those tools. You take a plan, you make a plan, you do it. You see how it goes, you analyze it, what have you uncovered, what have you discovered, etc. Praxis is a constant cycle of analysis and action, but it never ends with action. It ends with additional analysis, which then leads to new action, etc. So the process of being, in my opinion, a disciple of Jesus is to always be employing a kind of analysis and a practice, an action, and then looking at its repercussions, etc. One of the things that I am seeing CHUM now do, which is very, very exciting, isn't quite the right word, but I'm so grateful to them, is these series of classes, if you will, that will be on Thursday evenings, and I'm sure Patricia will tell us more about them, that look at the issues that have been identified in homelessness. It includes addiction and alcoholism, includes mental mental illness. It includes a number of various things. And that's, again, part of using social sciences to analyze a situation so that the work we are doing is informed. That it isn't just, we're not just out there doing good, passing out $5 bills. That it's informed work. So I, for one, am very grateful that CHUM is taking that on. As scary as those topics are, we will all be better informed so that the next step we take is one that employs those things that we've learned. So that's the thumbnail sketch of what I talked about last Sunday, but the sermon was too long. I was going to use the example of CHUM, but then we would have been here till noon, and nobody wanted to do that. So I'm going to turn it over now to one of my heroes, Patricia Benson, whose heart is so open to the needs of those who are in pain because they are not living or not able to live in protected homes. So thank you, dear heart, and welcome to Pilgrim, and we're anxious to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not a hero. I'm a deacon. I just wander through the world doing the work that God has placed before me. So I am a deacon for St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and I'm in a covenant relationship there, which means that 15 hours a week I spend working specifically on outreach within that community. And that's a covenanted relationship with the congregation, so it's a volunteer position. Deacons are bivocational. My day job is working for CHUM as the Congregational Outreach and Advocacy Coordinator. And so I am here today in that capacity to share with you our program, Stepping On Up. Yes, thank you. So this is our agenda for this morning. And I will basically walk through this time with you to give you some understanding, a deeper understanding of the homeless situation in Duluth. When you've met someone who is homeless, you've met one person who is homeless. So every individual has a different story. There's a different set of circumstances that have brought them to the place that they are today. And one of the things that I really want to talk about is that when we're talking about homelessness, we are first and foremost talking about a person, and bringing that healing that Carla referenced this morning in the gospel of Jesus healing the woman that was bent over for 18 years, bringing those healing opportunities to each person who finds themselves in this situation because they don't choose to be in this situation. It's circumstances that have brought them there. And in response to that, we've created a vision called Stepping On Up. We have a fall lineup of classes, as Carla mentioned, on community education to gain a deeper understanding of the issues and what some potential ways of addressing them, what some of those opportunities are, and then helping each member of our congregations and our community to participate in this community response at a level that's within your capacity. So we have lots of opportunities for what can I do? So the story of homelessness in Duluth. I keep getting a message on my screen that doesn't let me see my slides. So hold on just a moment there. So basically, we are looking at, with this graph, we are looking at the statistics from 2021, which was not a real normal year in some ways, but at the same time, it still reflects what we're dealing with on a regular annual basis. So of the people that CHUM served in 2021, 73% of them indicated that they had a serious mental illness. So a sickness, a health condition. 65% of them were men. 53% reported substance use disorder. 51% were white. 37% of them had spent the previous night outside in an uninhabitable situation, uninhabitable location. That might be living in your car, living in a tent, living under the bridge, living in a doorway, but they had spent the night somewhere that was not intended for human habitation. 35% were female, 26% were couch hopping. So 26% of them had been staying with someone who was sheltered. Maybe living in mom and dad's basement. How many of you have had kids come back home because they couldn't afford a place? But they were couch hopping, staying at a friend's. Policies in leases generally prohibit the amount of time you can have a guest join you if you're in an apartment on a rental situation. Policies in our legal code mean that you have a certain amount of time you can stay on someone who owns their home on their couch. If you go over a specific length of time, then you run into problems where they become a member of your household and you can't actually evict them. So there are certain policies in place that inhibit some of the practices where we would just open our doors and make it kind of challenging. And 9% of them were discharged from an institution, and that includes the jail, NERC, places like that. So that's the population that CHUM has served. Homelessness is increasing. Sheltered homelessness is up 12%, and this is from 2007 to 2020. This is kind of the picture that we're seeing. So if you look at the arrows, first of all, which direction are every single one of them headed? Up. We're not seeing anything that is going down. Total homelessness has increased 22%. Unsheltered homelessness is 37% increased. Unsheltered homelessness in Duluth means you are not living in a building. You are living outside or in a car, in a tent, but completely unsheltered. Individual homelessness is up 50%. Look at chronic homelessness. 83% increase. And I'm not going to get the definition exactly right, but I know that chronic homelessness is people that have been homeless for a year or homeless, I think it's more than 3 times in the last 2 years or something like that. But that number has increased dramatically. And then homeless in St. Louis County since 2015 has gone up 25%. The next slide. So how much does homelessness cost our community? The estimated public cost per person that is unhoused is $30,000 to $50,000 a year. That's what it's costing our community right now. That is got a lot of reasons behind that, but you all know that ER is more expensive than going to the doctor for preventive care, and calling the paramedics. All of those emergency support services are very costly. Detox units, stints in jail. I know that our chaplain at the Arrowhead Juvenile Center said that the population at the juvenile center goes up in the winter because kids will do something to get caught so they can be inside. Fire services, parks and rec, clearing of encampments, all of those things cost money. So $30,000 to $50,000 a year, I am in that window in my income, but I'm not homeless. If we could reallocate those funds in a way that actually support the individuals that are living homeless, it would actually cost our community less than it costs us to have people living homeless. Next slide. So last year, 554 people checked into the warming center last winter. So that's that 6-month period from November to April. And those 554 people were unique individuals. So it's not like Joe came every night, we counted him every night. They're unique individuals that have utilized the warming center. How many of you know what the warming center is? It's over in Lincoln Park. Okay, it's not a shelter. Think of your parish hall with the lights on, staffing there and a couple of volunteers to help out, and people can sleep on the floor, in a chair, whatever, but it's not a shelter. There is no bed, there is no darkness, and there is no privacy. And it's a wonderful facility that offers a desperate, desperate solution to people that are struggling to merely survive, 554 people in the warming center and 155 shelter beds in this entire community. And they are always full, booked or beyond our capacity. 47 of those beds are reserved for victims of domestic violence. So we have just a little over 100 beds for shelter. So why are we looking at building something other than more shelter beds? One of our pieces that we're looking at is that a shelter should be a temporary emergency response in a crisis. It is not intended to be long-term housing. So if we build more shelter beds, then we have more people that are chronically homeless living in a dormitory where they also encounter a lot of challenges, especially people with anxiety. They're chronically sleep deprived, all kinds of issues that we can deal with in a short-term crisis response, but are not suitable to any way of moving forward. So a shelter is for survival. And we're trying to get beyond survival to help people heal, to help them recover, to help them move into a better place where they can start to address some of their challenges in healthcare. Next slide. So homelessness is a supply and demand problem. The wait lists for subsidized housing stretch from months, in rare cases, to over 2 years. It can be a very difficult process when you qualify for assistance to get into housing, to actually find housing where you can use that voucher. So long-term chronic homelessness drastically impedes transition to permanent independent housing. And that's what we're trying to change. Next slide. Homelessness, what is our response? Oh, yeah, that's right, okay. We have a growing unsheltered population, so we have year-round overcrowded shelters. We have the warming center from November to March. How many of you remember this past April? Okay, I went on a little road trip with my son in April because I have a daughter who lives in Pennsylvania, and while I was gone, schools in Duluth were closed twice with winter storm warnings, events, whatever, winter storms. People were living outside because the warming center closed. So people were outside in that. A lot of times we think about Duluth winter as the hardest time for people to live in a tent or unsheltered, but a lot of people who have lived that way will tell you that it's actually worse in April and May because it's wet and cold and they can't get dry. So these same people that live in the warming center overnights in the winter from November to March live in places unfit for human habitation from April to October. We did have a change this year in the warming center schedule in that we basically were able to get a month added onto it. So we can open it 2 weeks earlier in October, and we can close it 2 weeks later in April. If October weather is gorgeous, and we want to push it up to November 1st, we may be able to extend it longer in April if it's needed, which will help, but it doesn't resolve the problem. Next slide, please. So here's our vision. And what happened to instigate this vision in the first place is that the city contacted the shelter providers and had a meeting and basically said, you know what, this is really having an impact on our community, on our downtown businesses, on our neighborhoods. We're going to have to start closing these encampments. There is an ordinance in this community that says you cannot camp outside in Duluth. It's just not allowed. And so that city ordinance allows the city then to go to these encampments and clean them out. Say, you can't camp here, we're trespassing you, you've got to get out of here. So what we have done is we've criminalized poverty. So where is someone living in a tent under the 35W? Where are they going to go? Inside? No. Their only option is to move to another illegal site. We've criminalized poverty because they have no other options. So the service providers said, well, where are they going to go? What are their options? They have no options. Where are they going to go? And the city's response was, well, in the shelters. Well, we have 600 people living unhoused. We already have 155 shelter beds that are completely full. That isn't a viable option. And the city invited the shelter providers to come up with a viable option, and this is the result. So this was a collaborative plan that was designed by people working with the folks that are homeless, that are living homeless, and listening to them, listening to their needs, looking at other communities and what they've been doing to come up with a plan that might work here. So phase 1 of the plan was an immediate response. And phase 1 is designed to address the growing need, the growing number of people living unsheltered. And while the perspective and the motivation is different for everyone that was involved in creating this plan, we came together in the fall of 2021 on a research bus tour to the Twin Cities to explore options that have been implemented there. That tour invited businesses, the head of the chamber, city officials, I think they just changed their name. Downtown Duluth? They just changed their name, but they were there. Hospital representatives, service providers, police, fire, all came together to do some research, fitting in very nicely with what Carla opened with here in our first step of practice, was examining the problem and examining some possible options, and which of these then would be appropriate for the city of Duluth. So phase 1 is an immediate short-term response that is designed to address the people that are living in places unfit for human habitation right now. It is not a permanent response. There was an article in the paper, I think maybe 2 weeks ago now, that talked about encampments not really being good. That might be true if it's a tent city and you're looking at it as long-term housing. It's not a good option for long-term housing, but that's not how we're using it. We're using it for a short-term stepping stone to viable housing that is secure and stable and that is indoor. So phase 1 is looked at, we were hoping for 2 years. This is the first summer and then next summer. And what phase 1 was designed to do was to buy the time to give people shelter while we buy the time to build phases 2 and 3. So phase 1 is immediate shelter, it's temporary, and it's during the season that the warming center is closed. Phase 2, by 2023, is a transitional response of indoor villages. And you can see on here it says 100 units. One of the things we learned on that research bus tour is that 100 units in one place is not a good idea. And so they informed, it was an informative tour. We're examining best practices from around the country. And so we are looking for 3 to 4 locations of 25 to 30 units that would be together. So that took our thinking away from Kmart, big box store kind of idea, and looking at things like maybe an office building that's closed, or a congregation, a church that's closed, or a smaller type of building with a smaller footprint where we can create these. And these are indoor units. They're individual units, but they have a key. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you had a house fire today, and you don't have any family around, and you're new to town, and nobody knows you, and you don't have anybody you feel you can ask to stay with. So you're going to go down to the shelter. And what's going to happen when you go down to the shelter is you're going to be in a dormitory situation with people you do not know, many of whom have some challenges related to, remember our population? Serious mental illness, some substance use disorder, and they're all traumatized because you've just been traumatized. Being homeless is a trauma event in and of itself. A fire is a trauma event. Moving is a trauma event. There are all kinds of pieces feeding into this. So you're going to go into this dormitory with bunk beds, with a whole bunch of other people. How are you going to sleep? How are you going to sleep? So now let's add chronic lack of sleep, lack of sufficient rest to the list of things that you are dealing with. Are you going to be thinking ahead to long-term solutions? Or are you going to be worried about how I'm going to make it through tonight? So one of the factors that influences people that are living homeless is their focus is on survival, which is only a step or two ahead, not focused on, oh, what am I going to be doing in a year? How am I going to reach that goal? What steps do I need to put into place? And so those are some of the factors that come up when people are homeless. So by going into this phase 2 with these secure units, folks have the opportunity to at least have a lock on the door, a place to store your stuff. So if you are going on a job interview, you're not going with the backpack or the wheelie suitcase that's got everything you currently own in it. You have a place to store those things, a stable place. You have access to meals and services. So in every one of these, a common denominator is that we're doing in-reach. Right now, if I'm working with someone trying to get them into rehab, and I meet them, under the 35 bridge, and then they get evicted, how do I find them to follow up? There's such an inconsistency in the ability for people to actually do the work that if they're ready to do it even, there's so many challenges for them to be able to step into those roles. And so by creating this small village where they have a secure place to be, we can then bring those service providers to them. They set up appointments and office hours and they meet them there. We can offer them hygiene facilities. They have showers and a kitchen and restrooms available. In phase 2, those units are probably communal. Like let's just imagine your congregation here. If this was an empty building and you had closed, you could set units up in the sanctuary and you would leave that as the place where people gathered to eat, and you would have the kitchen where they prepared the food, and you have restrooms and they'd put showers in, maybe a laundry room and small offices where they can meet with a healthcare provider or a caseworker. Those are the kinds of pieces we're looking at for phase 2. And then in phase 3, that is where we have stabilized folks in that indoor village, and then they can move on. Once they're stable, they can move into a tiny home community. Truly affordable housing. How many of you saw the program? There was just an announcement about tiny houses come to Duluth. $200,000 for, what was it, 175 square feet? $200,000. That is not affordable housing. We need to do this for far less than that in order to have people who are living here. And these are Duluth residents. There was some talk about Duluth was attracting all these people from all over the country who were coming here to be homeless. And that is not who we serve. The majority of the people that we serve live in Duluth. They're from Duluth. This is their home. And for a lot of them, we've eliminated their housing. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the partners that developed this plan. ACO, CHUM, HTC, Lifehouse, Salvation Army, Safe Haven, Lutheran Social Services, and Loaves and Fishes. So a lot of you probably know Joel Kilgore from Loaves and Fishes. He is the organizer for Stepping On Up. He also manages the warming center in the winter. And so CHUM and Joel working together are pretty much doing the lead on the development piece of this. And we're uniquely situated to do that because we are not only a service provider. We also have this outreach into our congregations in our communities in ways that some of the other partners in this are a little bit more limited in that. And the other side of this is that everybody is limited in capacity. Our staff are already stretched really, really thin trying to provide the services that we provide. And so we're trying not to take away from the services we're providing to people who need those services in order to do this plan, create this plan. So this is how we're moving forward. So the things that we learned, let's go to the next slide. The things that we've learned on phase 1 is that we're looking for 2 to 4, I know it says safe spaces, but if you think about that as safe sites, so locations to hold these phase 1 outdoor villages. Those would be, 12 to 15 tents. We'd have a fence around it. The first phase of this that we're working on is what we're calling Safe Bay. And Safe Bay was also referred to in the paper a few weeks ago. And it would be at Damiano Center's parking lot. And it is a place for people who are living in their vehicles to park, where they can safely live. It would be staffed. They have a shower truck there that has 6 showers in it, so they could have access to showers. There's a 24/7 porta potty there, so they have facilities. Bring in a hygiene station. We'd put a soft perimeter fence up, so we're looking at probably a snow fence that we would set up every evening and take down every morning, and then we'd block one of the entrances to the parking lot, so you can only come in one way. And you would be admitted by the staff person, and once you're in, you stay there for the night, and then the next morning you can have breakfast at Damiano, and then you leave and they have their parking lot back for the day. We are ready to go with that. Reading that article in the paper probably made it look like that was already open. It did to me. That's the way I perceived it, and I was like, oh, that's news, because we're not. And do you know why? Because we can't find anybody to serve as staff. And so we are ready to go. All the permitting, everything. So we're at the point where we're saying, hey, congregations, do we have any volunteers? And we were looking for 2 staff persons for each night. So you have to make that work over a 7-day week. So we were looking at a pool of 8 people that we were hoping to hire, $16 an hour, and they'd work a shift every night that would start at 7 p.m., go about halfway through, then somebody else comes in and works until it closes up in the morning. And right now, what we're hoping to do is maybe to recruit some volunteers who would be willing to take one of those shifts a week, so that there's some continuity in building relationship, but that it enables us to open, because we've been ready to go since the 1st of July.
Does the city have to pass the ordinance if they had the first reading on Monday? Can you use the microphones so the live stream can hear it?
I can repeat it. So there's an ordinance meeting, city council is meeting tomorrow night to vote, I think it's tomorrow. Okay, so the first of 3 readings, or 2 readings, okay, sorry. I haven't been that up on that side of it. I know that we're expecting it to pass, but they had to change that ordinance against encampment. They have to make some changes to that in order to permit some of these things. So it was a 1-year permit that would enable you to do some things. That is not necessary for Damiano, because they're not camping in tents, they're parking there. So Damiano is the Safe Bay shelter situation in the parking lot at Damiano is ready to go, except for help. So we desperately need help, and we were looking for people that could be, staff, and then those staff would have first priority in becoming staff at the warming center, because Safe Bay closes when the warming center opens, so they would just transition over is the hope, but we don't even have them yet. So if you know of anyone looking for work, or if you're willing to put some time in, we would deeply, deeply appreciate it. And you can find the coaching job on the CHUM website under the employment tab. It gives all the information about it. Let me scroll down here a little bit. See if I missed anything on this. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
My name is
Dave, yes.
Has there been any conversations with the college university community in the Twin Ports for opportunities for community service of that kind?
We are doing I know we're doing a volunteer fair at UMD on the 8th of September. We've got interns from Scholastica, and I mean, there's several university programs that are involved in working with CHUM. The challenge with this position, I think in particular, is that it's the graveyard shift. It's an overnight, and that is challenging for a lot of people in our schedules, so. Okay. Okay, we've talked about some of this, so let's move to the next slide. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, what's the success of the buildings like Steve O'Neill and the Fran Skinner apartments? Are those like permanent residence for people? Are those considered transition and they turn over every couple of years? What's the story about those?
So I know the Steve O'Neill answer is designed to be permanent housing, but it's also designed for families with children. So I think when your kids all leave, then that would no longer be an appropriate housing spot for you, but you could be there for 18 years.
Okay.
St. Francis Apartments is the same way. That is permanent housing for people who are over 55, have been chronically homeless, and are disabled. And so those folks, that may be where they live permanently. It's available to them permanently, and a lot of people, once you've stabilized, we go through that stabilization process. We experience healing, we experience growth, we experience change, and we may choose to exit the affordable housing, even phase 3, the tiny house option, and enter the mainstream market. But it's up to the individual. So,
Do we have anything in Duluth now that is an example of 2 or 3? Points 2 or 3 that you've had up there?
oh, this housing? The Duluth model is coming up. St. Francis Apartments is basically phase 2. Is it in the next slide? Okay, she knows the slides better than I do because she created this. So one of the things I want to start before we move to the next slide is to just look at well, maybe it is the next slide. Let me see here. Phase 1. Yes, let's go to the next one here. So we're looking at security, waste. We've already talked about some of these things. When you have unsheltered people living in an unsanctioned encampment, they have no access to porta potties. They have no access to a dumpster. They have no access to hygiene facilities, so they can't stay clean. And they struggle with the outcomes of that. And when it gets bad, what happens? We clean up that encampment. We go and we basically get rid of it all. But again, where do they go? They find another spot. Maybe it's in the woods this time or whatever, but they find another spot. So lack of alternatives is one of our biggest challenges, and we want to make sure that unhoused individuals have opportunity to be safe, to have a place to go overnight and during the day. And what we really want to do is create stable, safe, service-rich environments for harm reduction and growth. So we're looking at that in-reach, providing basic shelter needs, this is all phase 1, reduce harm from substance abuse, and decrease violence and emergency calls. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Here are all the cities, well, not all of them, 30 additional to this, but these are cities who have already put in some outdoor village scenarios. One of the things we're looking for, one of our working groups for Stepping On Up that we invite people to sign up for, is to gather together and do some research. So we know that we have this list out there, and what we're looking for are people who have the time and capacity to sit down and evaluate them. Go look through them, do that research, look at the best practices, what worked, what didn't work. When we went on the bus tour, one of the things we did was look at examples in the Twin Cities, and then we brought those ideas back here, and we're informed by that process, and that's why we're not doing 100-unit housing villages, we're doing them smaller. One of the other things they told us was that you really need to, you don't want to go create your plan and get all these stakeholders in the community committed to your plan, and then you take it to the city for the first time and find out you're violating 16 ordinances and there's all this policy that prohibits this and you haven't thought about, but to have them on board from the very beginning, and that is what we have done. And so we need people to help with this research and looking at these different community models, what they've done, what's worked, what can we learn for them. And those models, just because it worked in Albuquerque, does not mean it's going to work in Duluth. So maybe in Albuquerque, they're using bottled water for everything, but in Duluth, bottled water is gonna freeze. You know, they're just different parameters for our culture and our context and our climate. Okay, next slide. This is a picture on the left here. Avivo is one of the places that we visited when we went down to the Twin Cities. It's private, it's secure, it's temperature controlled, and they're built really quickly. They're little pods with a lock on the door. It's a staffed facility, so there's always somebody there kind of guiding what's happening in the units. And they really allow us to do a lot of in-reach so that you can identify folks, you can develop relationship with them, a trust relationship, and you can support them as they make choices for how they're going to move forward. The goals are to phase out the outdoor villages. So when these come up, then the other ones go away. They allow for continued in-reach and services, provide better protection from heat and cold, and it really enables people to start on that road towards stabilization. Because again, if you're thinking about how am I going to survive, where's my next meal going to come from, who's going to steal my phone while I'm trying to sleep in the shelter, all of those things, it's really hard to think ahead on what's next. And this gives us that ability to work towards stabilization. What's next? Next slide. Phase 3 is moving toward permanent housing. So this is looking at building 200 housing units that are very small and affordable. Tiny houses aren't for everyone, but a lot of people opt to live in them, not just people who can't afford anything else. I was at Loaves and Fish's block party yesterday visiting with a young man who works 6 10-hour-a-day shifts at the refinery, and he pays $500 a month for a bedroom with a bath. That's it. He's got a room in an old house on Jefferson Street. $500 a month, and he's working full-time. He's divorced, he's got child support, you know, there are other pieces in his life that are also bills. And he had to make choices on what are you going to do. Not everyone is going to be able to live at St. Francis Apartments. It's a hotel room with their own bathroom. They have a mini fridge, a microwave, we're trying to get them all crock pots, and the bathroom sink. And that's their cooking facilities. That is not going to work for everyone, but it's better than living in a tent. So the Duluth new model is the one on the bottom right over there. That's a consortium of Duluth housing providers, 12-unit dormitory-style housing. And Salvation Army and One Roof are getting ready to develop and manage that pilot. The picture at the top is St. Francis Apartments. The biggest challenge I see with St. Francis Apartments is it is designed for people who are over 55 and disabled. Can you see the slope? So going forward, I mean, the model is excellent. If we could find a hotel or a motel to use, we were thinking about the old hospital, but they had to take that down. There are all kinds of facilities out here that already exist that we could adapt to this stable housing. But we're looking for 200 housing units that are permanent or a step up, depending on the desires of the individual. They cost less than traditional construction. They maximize the use of state housing support funds, and they offer opportunities for the development of vocational and life skills. So if you have been chronically homeless and you have spent all your time thinking about that next step, you're not thinking ahead. Your brain literally does not have the capacity to make some of those things that you and I would think were reasonable or logical decisions. When you've gone through trauma, that doesn't always work. Your brain doesn't function that way, and that's part of what this fall education series talks about is how trauma impacts us, how it rewires our brain, and what we can do to find pathways to recovery. So some of these folks have not been in a place where they've had hygiene options. So if you've lived, some of them have been homeless for 10 years. If you've lived a really long period of time in survival mode, you have lost some of the skills that would enable you to survive in a stable mode. You might not know how to unplug a toilet, clean it. You know, I mean, because when things break and you are living just with everything broken, what do? You step away from it. There's a geographical solution. If you're in an encampment and it gets cleaned out, what do? You have a geographical solution and you move to another spot. If you're in a encampment and there is no community covenant, it's an unauthorized encampment, and a group moves in that doesn't meet your community needs or interferes with your community needs, maybe they're up late at night making noise or whatever it is, but you find it threatening, you come up with a geographical solution. You pick up your tent and you go find a new spot. Well, we're trying to get people into housing. We're trying to move them into a culture of stability. We need to eliminate the geographical solution and create community covenants, teach people how to resolve differences together, working together in ways that are respectful, that afford dignity to every person involved. Those types of skills need to be relearned. Skills on how to take care of the property, how to keep your home clean, how to keep yourself clean. If you haven't had access to a stable shower for years and you just cleaned up whenever you got the opportunity, how do you get into a pattern then of personal hygiene and, you know, showing up at appointments and all of those kinds of pieces that most of us know how to do and just take for granted. They're part of who we are. A lot of those skills have to be retaught. And so that's in phase 3, we're looking at that stability and taking those skills forward. So moving forward, these are the costs associated with the phases. Whoops, I just lost that slide. There we go. So in phase 1, we're looking at $300,000. What we are looking at providing in phase 1 at Damiano is easy. It's a soft fence. But for the tiny villages that are outdoor, I'm calling them seasonal villages. I don't know if we've actually come up with a formal name for them, but just these little villages, outdoor villages, and the outreach workers. So we would provide the tent, the sleeping bag, a sleeping platform. We have to put up a hard perimeter fence so it wouldn't be taken down every day. It's going to be there permanently, and it's aesthetically appealing and bringing in all of these different factors, and we would be providing those things to them. If they leave the encampment, they take the sleeping bag with them, and everything else stays there. So that's what we're looking at for $300,000 for 2 seasons. That would include 2 outreach workers, because again, we're building in a community covenant. Some things are a given: no drug use on site, no drinking on site, silence after 10 p.m., same rules that most of our community, the city of Duluth has an ordinance for quiet time, right? Those kinds of things. And then a lot of things the community will actually create. So they have a lot of input in what this community covenant looks like. Who is the person that you're going to bring in if you're in an argument with the guy next door? Who in your community is there that's going to be the person that you can talk to about that, to kind of help walk through it and figure out how we can resolve the issues? Those are the kinds of things we're looking at in phase 1. Phase 2 comes at a cost of $8 million, and that is building those units in 3 to 4 different sites. And phase 3 is $25 million, and that would be the 200 tiny house units. We've looked at least 12 locations. I think we're up to, I know of at least 14 now at this point, that we've looked at for situating these, and those are where we're needing some of the ordinance changes, specifically in regard to phase 1. Phases 2 and 3 are going to be a little bit different and have there's a lot more structure around them, and they're not brand new models to this community. There's already policies in place for infill. So I live in an R1 neighborhood, but I could and am looking at trying to add a small addition to my home that would be rentable. Like I could add an addition out the back of my dining room on a slab that would have a tiny house feel to it. And then there'd be a locking door between my home and that home, and they would have their own private exit and entrance, and then I could rent that, and the city will allow me to do that. So those are, they recognize that there's a huge problem with a housing shortage in this community, and we're working together to try to come up with those solutions. Okay. And then let's go to the next slide. We're almost done here. We're almost done. Addressing homelessness requires a community response. So both the community to walk alongside the people who have been living homeless, to support, but walk alongside, not to fix, walk alongside, and engage them in community, welcome them in community, because a lot of times they've been isolated from community. We have this fall series, the second and fourth Thursdays in September, October, and November. They're hosted by 3 different congregations. We did a brief training series. I'm sorry. Is the schedule? Okay, thank you. We did a brief concentrated training series at St. Paul's in the middle of July. Over a 3-night period, we had 70 plus people over that 3-night period going through some of these same topics. This time around, it's a little bit different. We're taking one evening on a Thursday evening, and we'll have a person with lived experience there to share their story. We'll have a professional from the community there who is an expert in that topic. We'll offer the training. We'll have time for discussion and really go deeper into each of these. And we will provide snacks, and you're free to bring your own. So let's go down one more slide. So this is the fall lineup. So September 8th, all of these are from 5:30 to 7:30. And do you remind me, is the 5:30, because you're on the committee and I'm not, is the 5:30 when we're doing the Homeless 101, or is that 5 o'clock? 5 o'clock, the doors open. Okay, then I can take it. I was just clarifying the time. So at 5 p.m., the door will open. If you are new to this conversation and don't really know a whole lot about stepping on up, come at 5 o'clock, and we'll do a half-hour preview to bring you up to speed, and then at 5:30, we'll go into the topic for that evening. So September 8th is at Lakeside Presbyterian. That's trauma-informed care. My congregation is doing the snacks for that particular event, so I can tell you, you get a bag lunch like we hand out to people that live homeless. So that's what we're doing that night. Using rhubarb jam. We took 100 pounds of frozen rhubarb and converted it into 10 gallons of freezer jam for churches doing outreach. And I don't know if your congregation makes sandwiches, but if you do, give me a call, because I've got a lot of jam. Then on the 22nd, so each congregation is hosting a month's worth of classes. On the 22nd, we're doing mental health crisis response. In October, we moved to First Covenant, and we'll be doing youth homelessness on the 6th, and human trafficking and sexual violence on the 20th. And then in November, we're going to 12 Holy Apostles, Greek Orthodox Church, and we'll be talking about substance use recovery and harm reduction, and understanding and de-escalating conflict. So these are the topics that we have. At CHUM, John Cole, our executive director, is inviting staff to participate in these, just to deepen our understanding. We practice this trauma-informed care. And when you're coming face-to-face with people who are experiencing issues, it's good to know how they think, to understand how they're wired, what's going on in their world, and how to listen to them, how to de-escalate if things are getting aggressive. All of those kinds of skills are part of what we're talking about. And I would suggest that we all have experienced trauma in the last 2 years for sure. In our political environment, in COVID, there are so many things going on in our world today that these classes benefit us in helping to understand how to better be in community, whether or not you are encountering people that are living homeless. So they're really valuable. Another piece that isn't in the slideshow, but that we are doing, when we did this first training, 3 of the presenters recommended the same book. It was called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks about trauma and what trauma does to us, but it also talks about pathways to recovery. So all of us probably have some mental quirks, mental illnesses to a certain extent. And in this book, one of the things it talks about is the things that we've gone through in our life and how they can impact us. So if I'm running into the same challenge over and over again, that I recognize that might be related to something in my past, and I'm wired a certain way to respond to that. It might be freezing, flight, the flight or fight, and the other one is freezing that people do. So if somebody gets in my face because they're really upset about something I do, what's my response? And this book helps me to understand why I have that response, and maybe to determine whether that's an appropriate response in this situation, or if my 8-year-old self is still dictating how I respond now, right? So it's an excellent text, and I invite you to join that. It's both virtual and in person. It is the day before the training series. So it's always on the Wednesday right before the training series. There's a noon and a 4:30 session. And you are welcome to join us. You'll find the registration on CHUM's homepage for that. And Dee has some both posters with the QR code that you can scan to register for the training series, as well as, I'm assuming you're publishing the link on your website or on announcements or something. So it's available. Okay, so what can I do? Participate. This morning, your pastor talked about that piece of praxis that she started last week, but about the first thing is the research, the learning, the theory, developing an understanding, and then moving into an action, an appropriate response based on your understanding, and then reflect on that. How did that work? How did that work for you? How did it work for the people that you're walking with? And then after reflection, go back and maybe tweak that holy experiment and adapt it to what's there. I can tell you that there's room for everyone. We're looking for people that will provide bag lunches. We're looking for people that will just sit down and listen. Not coaching. We're not looking for people to fix it. We're looking for people just to hear that story and help people that are experiencing trauma to express it. How many of you have ever been in a situation where you just had to tell something? You had to tell somebody. There's a wounding there, and part of the healing is that catharsis of sharing that story. And we need people just to do that. We need all kinds of people. And so we are looking at gathering volunteers, training them, building that community, walking alongside, developing relationship, just showing up once in a while, all kinds of different ways to get involved.
I'm going to add one more thing to that.
Yes.
So the Stepping Up group, I've been involved in outreach and education, right, which Pat and I are working on to start to get the word out so that we can learn, but there are other committees too. There's the homework committee that Pat was talking about. There's like 6 or 7. So I don't have them all in my head right now, but you might have skills in research, or you might have skills in working with the city on the city and county level. We have folks already thinking about that and how to make sure that we're working on the governmental side of things, as well as the fund issue and looking at what grants are out there, federal and statewide. We've got a lot of opportunities, I think, coming up now that some of the acts have passed that will hopefully apply to some of this. So the money isn't there. We've got to get that too. So there's a lot of skill sets we need.
And I could name some of those working groups. I lead the resident support group. So when we made the rhubarb jam, we also brought quilt fabric and the little strip of warm and natural that you cut off when you make a quilt, because it's always bigger than your quilt top. And we made sleep masks. So people that are sleeping in the warming center are in there. How many of you have ever tried to sleep in your car on a trip and the light prevented it? You just couldn't do it. So we're making sleep masks, simple, and we're making them out of scraps. So the sewing machine, I brought my sewing machines in and we were whipping out sleep masks. We're looking at different ways that we can support people to meet their needs. There's an organization called Laundry Love that started out on the West Coast, and it started when a homeless man named T-Bone was asked, what can we do? How can we make your life better? And he said, if I had clean clothes, maybe people would treat me like a human being. And of that came this program called Laundry Love. And they will send us the dry laundry sheets. If you're familiar with the dry detergents, they come in an envelope and you just tear off a sheet, throw it in the washer. They will send us that for free from Earth Breeze. And we just go around and collect the coins and show up at the laundromat and offer the money for the load and the detergent for the load, and then just hang out with the folks while they're there. Maybe bring a snack, bring a jigsaw puzzle or Scrabble, or, you know, just to be present with each other and help them get their laundry done. And so we're looking at, I've contacted 2 different laundromats in town. One of them is very interested in doing this with us, and so as we get that together, we're going to invite congregations to pick a day, you know, like we'll have probably like, we're asking the laundromat for the best time. So what's your slow period? And we'll take 3 hours that day at that time and offer this and get it started. And then have a congregation take that, adopt that maybe once a year. You know, just in November, we do Laundry Love and we'll go show up, or you may want to do it more frequently than that. And it's a wonderful way to build relationship with people that maybe you don't see every day or have an opportunity to sit down and chat with. We have an advocacy group, the one working with the city and the county on policies. We need a leader for that group. We have 30 people signed up for that team, and nobody feels really competent or confident enough to say, I'll coordinate that group. We have the research group, which I've already talked about. We have site selection and design. We have the resident support. We have the volunteer coordination and education. I'm trying to remember them all too, and I don't know that I've hit them all, but there is a handout flying around, and I think on the right-hand column, I think we listed some of those. So, but you can find it all on the website, steppingonupduluth.org, and it'll express a whole bunch of opportunities and invitations for you to get started, but I'd really, really invite you to come in September, starting in September, to our community education series. So thank you so much for your attention. I know it's time, so thank you so much. Yes?
But do you have any questions? Yeah.
One.
And I'm hanging around afterwards, so if you have questions you want to ask.
I didn't see any statistics with children in the statistics. Are they not part of the 554, that you gave?
Good question. The statistics on families usually, I mean, there are some youth shelters in town, so Lifehouse is a shelter that is designed for youth, and Steve O'Neill Apartments is families with children. We have the family shelter that's also in the Steve O'Neill Apartments building complex. And then LSS has Bethany House. I mean, there are a few different shelters that are very much focused on youth, but at CHUM itself, you can't be there unless you are over 18. There's just a safety parameter there. So in the drop-in shelter, a lot of the domestic violence shelters include youth in those because it's parents escaping with children to be safe from domestic violence. I actually don't know the numbers on youth. I do know that it's a very fast-growing population. The numbers that I gave you on that first graph are the people that CHUM serves. That was at the drop-in center, so that was a different group. I do know that that families are a growing need, and one of the things we're looking at when we look at the conversation about the little individual units, the indoor housing, and the tiny homes, is that there is nothing in town for couples. Yeah. Nothing for couples that are childless. So that's a factor as well. Because a lot of times that's where your safety and security is. A lot of our people have dogs. Tons of our people have dogs, because if they're out sleeping, they can sleep if their dog will alert them that they're being threatened.
So I'm going to thank you all for coming. I know it's kind of been a long second hour, and let's close out here, but have any other questions, we'll hang around for some minutes afterward. But please share what you learned and let other pilgrims know that this has been taped as we move forward. Hopefully we can get more involved in some of these small groups. And thank you so much, Pat, for doing this, because your depth of knowledge is just incredible on this subject. So appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Hi. Good morning.
I'm Steve Cushing, and I spoke with Diane about this subject last week, and maybe CHUM has already investigated the possibilities. But, St. Mary's is going to knock down that building. at
Yeah.
the cost of several $1 million.
We've already checked with them, yes.
And they're not interested.
Well, the